Wyoming Territory, 1882. The wind had already buried the tracks by the time Rowan McAllister spotted the smoke curling from the busted chimney of the old O'Dell place, halfway up Widow's Ridge. He nudged his chestnut gelding forward, squinting into the late afternoon light. Snow was only a whisper away from falling again. Folks said the widow and her 2 girls had been left with nothing. Her husband rode out with another woman 6 months ago and never came back. Most folks stopped talking about her after that. Rowan had not. He dismounted slow, cradling the cloth-wrapped bundle in one arm, a glass bottle of milk in the other. He rapped his knuckles on the door once before it creaked open a crack. A girl's face peeked out, freckled and wary. "Hi," Rowan said gently. "I brought bread and milk." The door opened wider. The girl looked back inside, then stepped aside. She could have been 9 or 10, skinny as a rail, wearing a coat 2 sizes too big. A second girl, younger, sat on the floor under a patched quilt, her cheeks red from the cold. And there, kneeling beside the hearth, feeding dry kindling into a flickering flame, was her, Lorien O'Dell. Rowan felt every part of him go still. She stood up slow, brushing her hands on her skirt. Her hair was pulled back, but strands fell loose around her face. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired a night's sleep could fix, the deeper kind, the kind that came from carrying too much for too long. "Rowan," she said, recognizing him. "I was down by the creek," he said, holding the bread and milk out. "Thought I'd stop by." She hesitated before taking them. "Thank you," he nodded, unsure what else to say. The girls had gone quiet, watching him. One of them hugged the bread to her chest. Lorien didn't look at him again right away. She set the milk by the stove and pressed her hand against the glass like it might warm faster that way. "You all right up here?" he asked. "We manage. You got enough wood?" "Enough." He wasn't sure if she was lying or just done with questions. He looked around. The place had been built sturdy, but it was showing its wear. The back window was covered with nailed-up feed sacks. There was one chair, a cot in the corner, a cracked plate drying on a towel. "I could bring more tomorrow," he said. She looked up then, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "Why?" he shrugged. "I got extra." Lorien studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "All right." That night Rowan rode back under a sky heavy with snow, the wind biting at his collar. He could not shake the look in her eyes. She had not asked for help, but she had not turned it away either. The next morning he brought eggs and another loaf. The morning after that, salt pork. Then potatoes. Always quiet, always careful. He never stayed long. Just enough to see the girls were eating, to make sure the chimney was still smoking. By the 4th day, the younger girl, Vera, Lorien called her, ran to the door when he knocked. She smiled, her front teeth missing. "Rowan brought more bread." Rowan grinned. "That I did." Lorien stepped out onto the porch that day, arms crossed, her shawl pulled tight. "You do not have to keep coming," she said. "I know," he replied. "I can figure this out." "I reckon you will," he said. "But until then, I got more than I need." She looked down, the snow crunching beneath her boots. "It has been a long winter," he nodded. "It has." She blinked fast and looked away, jaw tight. "Thank you." He tipped his hat. "See you tomorrow," and he did, every day for a week. Her face changed by degrees, less guarded, more color to her cheeks. She started waiting on the porch when he came. Sometimes she sent the girls inside and they talked a little. About the weather. About her goats. About nothing really, but it was something. On the 7th day, Rowan came late. He had been hauling fence posts and his back ached. But he still brought bread warm from the oven and milk in a bottle wrapped in cloth. Lorien met him outside. The sky had turned gold behind her, the wind soft now, the worst of the storm past. She took the bundle from his hands, then paused. "You do not have to keep doing this," she said again. "I know," he said, his voice quieter now, "but I brought something else too." She looked up. He took a breath, then met her eyes. "I brought my heart too, if you will take it." She stared at him, the cold between them forgotten. He swallowed. "I know it is fast, and maybe it is foolish, but I see you. I see how you fight for those girls, how you keep going. And I would ride through snow every day for the rest of my life if it meant you did not have to do it alone." Lorien looked down at the bread in her arms, then back at him. Her eyes were wet, but she smiled, slow and true. "You are not foolish," she said. "And I see you too." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. She leaned into his hand without thinking. "I did not think anyone would come," she whispered. "I did," he said. "I came." The door creaked behind them and Vera peeked her head out. "Mama, is Rowan staying for supper?" Lorien laughed softly, still watching him. "He is now." Rowan returned the next evening with a tin of dried apples tucked into his saddlebag and a bundle of kindling strapped behind the saddle. The trail up Widow's Ridge was slick from the melt, and his horse picked its way careful over the high ruts and rocks. Smoke rose steady from the chimney now. Not strong, not thick, but steady, and that steadiness settled something in his chest. When Lorien opened the door this time, she didn't step back. She held it with one hand, her other arm cradling her youngest, who'd fallen asleep against her shoulder. Her blouse was dusted with flour along the waist, and her hair was pulled into a twist at the nape of her neck. "I started souring milk for butter," she said before he could speak. "It's not much, but it's something." He passed her the apples. "That'll help with the girls' teeth if they don't go eating them all at once." She smiled, but it was thinner than before. "They won't. I've already told them they've got to last the month." He stepped inside without waiting to be asked. The air was warmer than it had been, and he caught the scent of something faintly sweet, a pot of cornmeal mush left simmering on the stove. "Your hand's still bothering you?" he asked, nodding toward her wrist as she settled Vera onto the cot. She flexed her fingers. "Less than before. I stopped splitting logs myself. I use the heel of the axe and lean into it." "That's still slower than it ought to be," he said, crouching near the stove. "I can leave a cedar load by the shed, all chopped. You already bring enough. Don't matter." She didn't argue. Instead, she stepped over to the shelf and took down a small tin cup. "I boiled spruce tips with honey. It's not tea, but it soothes." He took the cup from her fingers, his thumb brushing the edge of her palm. "Thank you. You're the only one who's thanked me for anything in a long while," she said softly. He took a sip. It was bitter and sharp, but warm. "Folks forget fast," he said. "Especially when it's not their burden." She folded her arms, leaning against the beam that supported the low ceiling. "When he left, one woman told me it was probably for the best." As if being alone with 2 mouths to feed and no coin to trade was some kind of mercy. He set the cup down and looked at her. "You ever think of leaving?" She shook her head. "I couldn't. The girls were born in this house. There's a spring behind the ridge and the soil's good come thaw. It's home even now." He nodded once, quiet. "Did you ever marry?" she asked suddenly, her eyes on the floor. "No," he said. "I came close once. She changed her mind." Lorien said nothing for a moment, then stepped over to the window to pull the curtain closed. "I used to think the hardest part would be the leaving," she said. "But it's the staying that wears you down, staying when it's easier to give up." He crossed to her, slow. "Then it's a good thing you're so damn stubborn." She turned to him. "You don't have to keep showing up here, I know. I don't expect anything from you." He looked at her a long time. "I brought my heart, Lorien, not just my hands." Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. "I can't promise it'll be easy," she said. "I carry more weight than I can name." "I'm not afraid of your weight," he said. "I've carried my own." They stood there in the hush that follows truth, the fire crackling behind them, the girls asleep, the wind quiet outside for once. Finally, Lorien reached for his hand. Not with hesitation, but with care. "If you mean to stay, Rowan," she said, "then stay for all of it. The bad days, too." He closed his hand around hers. "I don't show up for the easy parts." She leaned against him then, her forehead resting just below his collarbone. He held her there, steady as a fence post, warm as the hearth they'd built between them. The thaw came slow that spring, dragging its heels through March and halfway into April before the last of the snow softened into mud and the creek behind the ridge ran clear. Rowan spent most mornings mending his lower pasture fence, but by late afternoon he rode up to Lorien's place with whatever he could spare: twine, seed, a handful of old nails wrapped in a rag. He never came empty-handed, and she never let him leave without supper. That evening, he found her bent over a broken hinge, trying to coax the barn door back into place with a rusted hammer and more grit than leverage. "You're favoring your left foot," he said as he stepped down from the saddle. She gave the hinge one last strike before straightening. "Stepped wrong in the root cellar, I'll be fine. You always say that. And I'm always right," she said, brushing her hands off on her skirt. He took the hammer gently from her and examined the hinge. "It's bent at the pin, needs replacing, I figured. We've got another one inside, but the screws are gone. I'll bring some tomorrow." She looked at him then, quiet for a beat. "You ever tire of fixing what isn't yours?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he knelt and checked the wood around the hinge, then finally stood. "It is mine." Now, Lorien didn't smile, but her eyes held something steady and calm. "Then you'd best start knowing where things are kept." He followed her inside, where the girls were shelling beans into a tin basin. The older one, Clara, offered him a handful. "Some are soft," she warned. "I can chew," he said, and she nodded solemnly as if that settled it. Lorien handed him the replacement hinge from a drawer near the stove. Her fingers brushed his, but she said nothing. As dusk settled, Rowan stayed to help mend the barn. They worked in tandem, her holding the door steady against the wind while he drove the new hinge into place. When the last screw was set, she leaned her shoulder against the frame and looked out toward the tree line. "The wild roses will bloom soon," she said. "They always come before anything else. I could dig up a few and plant them closer to the porch." She glanced at him. "You know where to find them. They grow along the edge of my east field." She was quiet a moment. "You remember everything, don't you? Only what matters." Later, after the girls had gone to bed and the last embers in the stove glowed soft, Lorien poured 2 mugs of boiled chicory. They sat across from one another at the table worn smooth by years of use. The lamp between them flickered in the draught, casting low gold light across her cheekbones and the line of her throat. Rowan sipped carefully, watching her over the rim. "You still sleep with a rifle near the door?" She met his gaze evenly. "I won't stop if that's what you're asking. I'm not asking you to, just wondering if you feel any safer now." "I don't know," she said, "but I'm less tired." He nodded once, understanding more than he let on. She reached for her mug but didn't drink. "I used to wait for the sound of hooves. Every night, thought maybe he'd come back, not because I wanted him to, but because I needed to scream at him first. And now, I don't wait anymore." He set his mug down slow. "That's a kind of peace. I didn't think I'd ever find any," she said, then added after a beat, "Not with someone else." "You didn't find it with me," he said. "You built it. I just showed up." She looked at him across the table, her eyes clear. "You stayed. I will keep staying." The lamplight caught in her hair and she reached across the table, resting her hand over his. Her grip was firm, not uncertain. "I can't offer you ease," she said. "Not luxury. Just a roof patched with bark and days that start before the sun. I never asked for anything else. And I've got 2 girls who still cry sometimes when they think I'm not listening. I reckon I can carry 2 more hearts if you'll let me." She drew in a soft breath, her fingers curling tighter around his. "Then you'd best be here come morning. The henhouse latch is busted. I'll bring my tools." They sat a while longer, neither in a hurry to break the quiet. When he finally rose to leave, she walked him to the door and stood just outside on the step, the cool air brushing her hair loose. "I don't know how you knew to come that first day," she said. "I didn't," he replied. "I just saw smoke and thought maybe someone still believed the fire was worth keeping. And now I know for certain." She leaned in then, close enough that her breath reached his collar. "Then come back tomorrow and the day after that." He touched her cheek with the back of his fingers, reverent. "I will, Lorien, for the rest of my days if you'll have me." She didn't reply in words. She didn't need to. She stepped forward and kissed him once, honest and sure, like a promise made in the breath between seasons when winter has finally passed, and something new waits just beneath the thaw. The creek behind the ridge had begun to swell. thick with meltwater and bits of broken ice spinning in the current. Rowan stood knee-deep in the thinning snow, the spade biting into thawed earth while the sun slipped lower behind the hills. He worked in silence, sleeves rolled to the elbow, placing each root ball of wild rose into the shallow trench with care. The petals wouldn't show until June, maybe later, but Lorien had said she liked them, so he'd brought 5, cut from the eastern edge of his field at first light. The girls were in the kitchen when he arrived, Clara grinding oats with a stone pestle, Vera trying to catch flour dust in the air. Lorien was in the loft, her voice trailing down through the slats as she called for them to hang their cloaks. Rowan set the folded blanket and the tin of lye soap on the table. "Found these at the trading post," he said. "Thought they might come in useful." Lorien descended the ladder, wiping her hands on her apron. "We ran through the last of our soap 2 days ago. I figured," he said. "Your hands have been red." She looked at him, then at the blanket. "That's wool. It's clean," he said. "No moth holes." She crossed to the table, running her fingers along the hem. "You didn't need to spend on us." "I didn't," he said. "Traded for it." Tanner needed help hauling salt barrels. Her eyes lingered on the blanket a moment longer, then met his. "You always find a way. I don't see the use in standing still when there's something to be done." Vera came over, tugging at Lorien's skirt. "Mama, can Rowan stay for the story tonight?" Lorien glanced up at him, one brow lifting. "She means the one about the horsemaker's son. You read it better than I do." "I don't read it better," Rowan said, crouching beside the girl. "I just use funny voices." "That's what makes it better," Vera whispered. Like it was the most obvious thing in the world, he stayed. After the girls had eaten and the last bowl was rinsed and turned upside down to dry, Rowan took the battered book from the shelf and settled near the hearth. Clara curled under the quilt, Vera on her shoulder. Lorien sat just behind them, sewing needle in hand, her foot tucked beneath her. Rowan read until the lamplight flickered low, his voice soft around the words. When the story ended, the girls were already asleep. "You don't have to ride back tonight," Lorien said, her voice barely above a breath. "The barn's warm enough and there's feed in the bin." Rowan looked up at her. "You sure?" She nodded. "I've got a spare blanket." He helped her carry it out. The moon was high, casting silver over the fields and roof lines. The barn creaked gently as the wind slipped through the slats. "I stitched the torn saddle pad," she said, setting the blanket on the hay bale. "It's in better shape now. I noticed," he said. "Thanks." She lingered by the open door, the lantern in her hand casting a faint glow down her sleeve. "You've made space here," she said after a while. "Not just room, space." He stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough that her warmth reached him. "I wasn't sure if I should. I wasn't sure anyone would." Rowan looked at her, the way her hair caught the lantern light, the quiet resolve in her face that had never once faltered, not even in the worst of the cold. "I reckon I'll need a place to store my things soon," he said. She tilted her head. "Planning on leaving things behind?" "No," he said. "Planning on staying long enough to need a drawer?" Lorien didn't smile, but she reached out and touched the side of his face, thumb grazing the edge of his jaw like she was memorizing it. "There's room in the loft," she said, "and the bed's wide enough." He caught her hand in his, pressed it to his chest. "I'll make sure you never have to carry all of it alone again." Her eyes didn't waver. "I believe you." They stood there a long time while the night settled in around them, the barn warm behind, the house glowing faintly through the frost glass window. When she leaned into him, it wasn't sudden. It was the kind of closeness built slow, earned over every long walk, every quiet supper, every word not said. His arms held her like something meant to last, and when they finally parted, it was only so she could say, "Come in before dawn." "The girls will want to show you the seed rows." "I'll be there," he said, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. "I always am." By early June, the first shoots of green curled through the garden soil behind the house, and the ridge had softened into color again. Rowan built a low fence around the plot with cedar rails he'd hewn himself, not because any creature threatened it, but because Lorien said it helped the girls understand what was theirs to tend. That morning, Lorien stood beside him in the shade of the porch, her hands streaked with sap and dirt, hair damp at the nape from the sun. She watched Clara and Vera kneeling beside the bean rows, their heads bent as they pushed seed into the earth with quiet concentration. "They've never had a summer like this," she said, "not one where everything stayed settled." Rowan adjusted the brim of his hat. "Settled's a good word for it." She turned toward him, her face shaded and thoughtful. "What would you think of building on the north side of the barn?" "For what? A proper room. There's no space for you upstairs, not unless we're climbing over one another." He rubbed his jaw, considering. "If I build it, I'm building it to share." Her gaze held steady. "That's what I mean." They set about it the next day. Rowan took measurements with a length of twine while Lorien drew rough marks on the side of the barn with charcoal. Vera was tasked with holding the extra nails, Clara with keeping the goats from chewing the cart straps. It was a week of long days and rough splinters, but when the frame was raised and the walls chinked, Lorien walked through the doorway and turned to him with her arms folded. "I want a window here," she said, pointing, "so I can see the ridge at dusk." He stepped beside her, looking where she pointed. "You'll have it." That night they sat beneath the stars, backs against the barn wall, their shoulders touching. Lorien's hair was still damp from washing, the smell of rosemary clinging faintly to her skin. He held her hand loosely, fingers threaded, neither of them in a hurry. She tilted her head against his shoulder. "I never thought I'd be warm again in the way that matters." He kissed her temple, slow and sure. "You're not alone anymore, I know," she said. "And I believe it." They were married the following Sunday in the clearing behind the house, with the wild roses blooming along the fence and the girls scattering clover heads along the path. Clara wore a blue ribbon Lorien had saved from the sewing tin for 3 years. Vera carried a bundle of sage and pine. Lorien's dress was simple, the same one she wore to town every spring, but Rowan looked at her like she wore the world. The preacher from the Valley Church came up for the ceremony, and afterward they ate cornbread and berry jam and drank tin cups of cider passed between neighbors. No one mentioned the past. No one whispered about what had been, only what was. That night, when the girls were asleep and the house hushed, Rowan stood in the doorway of the new room, watching Lorien fold quilts at the foot of the bed. The window caught the last of the light, casting pale gold across her back. He stepped behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. She leaned into him without hesitation. "Feels like the house is breathing easier now. So do I." She turned in his arms, her hands resting on his chest. "You ever think it'd be this?" He shook his head. "I hoped for it. But I didn't expect it." She reached up and brushed her fingers along the side of his neck, eyes searching his. "I love you, Rowan McAllister, I know," he said. "And I love you right back." They lay down in the bed they'd built together, under a roof they'd thatched with their own hands. The wind moved soft through the trees, the ridge quiet and watchful. He held her close, her head tucked beneath his chin, and when she sighed, it was the sound of someone who had finally come home, years past. The roses thickened along the fence line, the garden yielding more with each season. Rowan taught Clara how to fit a saddle properly, and Vera learned to track deer by the shape of their prints. Lorien kept bees, and their honey sold well enough to trade for cotton and flour in town. They never grew rich, but the pantry stayed full and the roof never leaked again. Rowan built a cradle the winter the baby came. A boy, strong-lunged and red-cheeked, who had his mother's eyes and his father's quiet. Vera sang to him while she shelled peas, and Clara built him a toy horse from scrap wood and twine. One evening after supper, Rowan sat on the porch with the baby in his lap, the girls chasing fireflies in the yard. Lorien settled beside him, her hand resting on his thigh, her face tired in the best way. "You remember the day you first came up the ridge?" she asked. He nodded. "Snow in the air. Bread in my hands. I remember wondering how long you'd stay." He turned toward her and kissed her slow, the kind of kiss that carried every word they'd never had to say. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. "I stayed," he said, "and I always will," and he did. Through summers and lean winters, through births and filled root cellars, through long days and quiet nights. They remained rooted, steady and deeply, fully loved, under the same roof with their hands together and their hearts at rest.